The war did not begin with an explosion or a scream. It began with waiting, so dense and suffocating that people caught themselves thinking a shot would be a relief. Because when nothing happens, fear starts speaking louder than artillery. And it was in this silence that they understood this would be the hardest war of all, because shooting was forbidden, and waiting was the order. "How much longer?" one of the soldiers said quietly, but with an anger that could no longer be hidden, staring into the darkness ahead of the positions. "We've been sitting here for hours, days, and I feel my hands shaking not from the cold, but because I don't know when this will begin, because uncertainty eats you faster than any attack." The commander did not answer at once, because his silence was part of the order, and only after a long pause did he speak evenly, as if every word had been hammered into him along with the oath. "This is the fight," he said, without looking at his men. "The enemy is sitting opposite and doing the same thing, waiting, listening, watching, and the one who wins is the one whose nerves break last, because a shot right now would mean not an attack, but defeat." On the other side of the front, lights were visible, motionless like a predator's eyes, and each of them felt like a sight aimed straight at the head. Someone whispered, almost in despair, that this kind of waiting was worse than an assault, because during an assault at least you know when you might die. "And what if they don't fire at all?" another voice asked, cracked and full of anger. "What if this war has decided to break us without blood, to make us make the mistake ourselves, simply because we are human and not machines?" The commander turned sharply, and there was no sympathy in his gaze, only a truth that hurt more than any curse. "That is exactly what they are counting on," he replied heavily, "because a war without shots leaves no heroes. It leaves only those who endured, and those who broke. And if any of you thinks that silence is safe, then he has already lost this battle in his own head." Silence covered the positions again, but now it was different, filled with words that did not disappear, and every soldier felt how waiting was slowly turning into a weapon, aimed not outward, but inward. And it became clear that this war would not end with an explosion, because its goal was to make a person break before the first shot was ever fired. And somewhere between those gazes in the darkness and fingers gripping cold metal, a terrifying realization was born. If the first shot does finally sound, it will not be the beginning of the war, but proof that waiting has won. Waiting began to change people faster than any wounds, because when war does not allow you to shoot, it forces you to listen. And listening to your own thoughts in a trench is like sitting across from an enemy who knows all your fears. The soldiers caught themselves feeling that every rustle sounded like an order, every shadow like a provocation, every minute like a trap. "I no longer feel time," one of them whispered, staring into the night as if it were staring back. "Day or night, an hour or a week, it's all merged into one long waiting, and I'm starting to fear not the enemy, but the moment when I myself will want to fire, just to make it end." The commander slowly walked along the positions, stopping by each soldier, not as a superior, but as a witness, because his job now was not to give orders, but to prevent breakdowns. And when he spoke, there was the tension of a man holding other people's nerves with bare hands in his voice. "If any of you thinks that a shot will bring control back," he said harshly, "know this. It will only open a door with no way back, because this war is waiting precisely for that, for us to give it a reason to become ordinary again." Suddenly there was movement on the other side of the front, not an attack and not a retreat, but a demonstrative presence, and hearts in the trenches clenched in unison, because it was a wordless challenge, an invitation to break first. "They're playing with us," someone hissed through clenched teeth, with an anger already searching for a way out. "They want us to lose our nerve, so they can later say it was us who started it, that the waiting was pointless." The commander stopped abruptly and answered as if each word had to carve itself into memory. "That is exactly why we stay silent," he said, "because the one who wins is not the one who shoots first, but the one who endures longer. And if someone breaks now, this silence will turn into proof of our weakness, which will be used against us. The tension kept growing, and within it appeared a new feeling: anger at their own command, at the war, at the rules that forced them to sit and wait, while fear gnawed from the inside. And finally, one of the soldiers could not hold it anymore. His voice cracked, but his words were clear and painful. "And what if we just die here?" he said. "Not from bullets, but from this waiting. Who will then say we did the right thing? Who will remember that we did not shoot because we were ordered to be patient?" The commander looked at him for a long time, heavily, and answered as if he were speaking not to one soldier, but to everyone at once. "No one," he said. "And that is the cruelty of this war, because a war without shots gives no medals. It leaves only the choice between breaking beautifully or standing silently, knowing that no one will ever write about it." Silence covered the positions again, but now it was filled with anger and doubt, and it became clear that the second act of this war was not about the enemy opposite, but about how long a person can wait before finally asking for permission to shoot, just to feel alive again. Waiting stopped being passive. It became a pressure that slowly bends the spine, and the soldiers felt it the moment fear stopped being sharp and turned into habit, because habitual fear is more dangerous than panic. It forces a person to live in tension for so long that one day it begins to feel as if any other state is impossible. "I can no longer tell an order from a thought," one of the soldiers said dully, staring into the darkness where the enemy never appeared. "It feels like I hear voices, but I don't know whether it's them or whether I've started talking to the emptiness myself, because the silence here behaves like a living thing." The commander stopped beside him and did not answer at once, because he understood that any trivial phrase now could become the final push toward collapse. Only after a long pause did he speak slowly, with the heavy honesty that does not soothe, but keeps a person balanced on the edge. "If you've started doubting yourself," he said, "then the waiting is working exactly as intended, because a war without gunfire does not fight the body. It fights identity. It erases the line between who you are and what is demanded of you." At that moment, footsteps came from the other side of the front, clear, deliberate, not concealed, and everyone tensed at once, because it was not an attack but a demonstration, proof that they too were waiting and watching, and that symmetry was more frightening than numerical superiority. "They're mirroring us," someone whispered, and there was more terror in that whisper than in a scream. "They want us to see ourselves on the other side, to understand that there is no difference, and that if we fire, we'll be firing at people exactly like us." The commander clenched his fists, because this was what he feared most, and he answered sharply, almost cruelly, as if trying to hold order together by force of voice alone. "That is exactly why we don't shoot," he said, "because the first shot in this war will not be about defense. It will be about convenience, about the desire to see the enemy as a target again instead of a human being who also isn't sleeping and is also waiting." The tension suddenly found an outlet. One of the soldiers stood up abruptly, not aiming his weapon but holding it as if it weighed more than he did, and anger entered his voice, an anger that no longer wanted to remain silent. "So how much longer?" he shouted. "A day? A week? A month? Until one of us snaps, and then you'll say he was weak, that he couldn't endure. But who will answer for the fact that we're rotting here with no right to act?" The commander stepped closer, looking straight into his eyes, not as an officer, but as a man carrying responsibility for every possible breakdown. "I will," he said quietly, but the words cut through the noise of thought. "Because if this war teaches you to wait instead of shoot, even at the cost of nerves and rage, then perhaps this is the only victory it can offer without blood." Silence covered the positions again, but now it was filled with a conflict that could no longer be ignored, because the third act of this war without gunfire revealed the most terrifying truth. The enemy is not advancing, not retreating, and not openly provoking. He is simply waiting for people to ask for permission to return to the familiar, comprehensible war of explosions, where there is no need to think, only to obey. The waiting reached a boundary beyond which a person either breaks or finds something new within themselves, And the soldiers felt it at the moment when silence stopped being frightening and started to make them angry. Because fear can still be endured, but anger with no outlet always looks for a victim, even if that victim becomes one's own mind. "They are doing nothing on purpose," one of the soldiers said with a dull hatred that no longer tried to hide itself. "They want us to eat ourselves from the inside, for one of us to crack and pull the trigger, because then this cursed silence will stop being a problem for them." The commander stood motionless, but his face was tense, as if he were physically holding this line of silence in place. And when he spoke, there was no comfort in his voice, only a hard truth that was difficult to accept. "They're not doing it on purpose," he said. "They're simply doing the same thing we are, because a war without shots has no script. There are no beautiful moves in it, only endurance, and right now each of us is a test for the other." Suddenly, in the silence, the radio crackled, short and sharp, like a blow, and everyone froze, because any signal now felt like the beginning of the end, and the commander slowly raised it to his mouth, feeling responsibility tighten around his throat. "Time is up." The voice from above came through, cold and indifferent. "If contact is not initiated, permission to open fire will be granted automatically, because delay is no longer considered a tactical decision." Those words hit harder than artillery, because they meant that waiting now had a deadline, and the soldiers felt tension turn into panic, because now a shot was not a weakness but an order, and that was exactly what they feared most. "They want to force us," someone whispered. "They want the first shot to be formally authorized, so that conscience no longer matters to anyone." The commander slowly lowered the radio and looked at the people as if he were seeing them for the last time, and he spoke loudly without shouting, but in a way that made every word cut through the silence. "If this order is carried out," he said, "this war will become ordinary, understandable, and convenient, because we will once again know what to do. But if we find a way to endure a little longer without shooting, we will break not the front line, but the logic by which we are forced to kill." One of the soldiers took a step forward, his hands trembling not from fear, but from a decision that hurt more than any wound. "And if we don't endure," he said, looking the commander in the eyes, "if we break right now, who will later say that we were weak and not simply human?" The commander did not answer immediately, because the question had no correct answer, and when he finally spoke, there was something like respect in his voice. "Then we will be human," he said. "But if we endure, we will be humans who forced the war to wait." Silence once again covered the positions, but now it was filled with a countdown, because everyone understood that the next act would be the final one, and that a war without shots would either prove that waiting can be a form of resistance, or it would break at the exact second when someone decides that waiting is no longer possible. The countdown moved not in seconds but in breaths, and each breath felt excessive, because everyone knew that the next order would either destroy this silence or turn it into a crime. In this thin line between permission and prohibition, the war for the first time looked confused, as if it no longer knew how to make people shoot when they simply stood and waited. "This is your last chance," the voice on the radio sounded, no longer metallic and cold, but irritated, revealing weakness. "Either you open fire, or the responsibility for the consequences will fall on you personally." The commander closed his eyes for a moment, not as a gesture of prayer, but as a way to gather what remained of his resolve, and spoke as if these words were not an answer to his superiors, but a verdict on the war itself. "I take responsibility," he said clearly, without pathos. "And if anyone is looking for someone to blame for the fact that no blood was spilled today, they are speaking to me now." Not a single shot rang out, and this absence of sound became the loudest event of the entire wait, because the soldiers suddenly realized that nothing happened. The world did not explode, the enemy did not advance, and the war, deprived of gunfire, hung suspended in the emptiness of its own logic. They're not shooting," one of the soldiers whispered, and in that whisper there was more surprise than relief. "They're waiting too." The commander opened his eyes and looked ahead, into the darkness where there was no longer any movement, and replied quietly, but with such weight that the words settled inside everyone. "Because the first shot was supposed to be ours," he said, "and when we didn't fire it, this war lost the excuse to begin the way it was used to." The radio crackled again, but the voice was different now, restrained, cautious, as if stating a fact rather than issuing an order. "Contact postponed." It sounded dryly. Positions fixed, decision under review. Someone slowly sank to the ground. Someone laughed nervously. Someone cried openly, because the tension that had been holding them all finally found a release. And that release was not an explosion, but the realization that they had endured. "So this is the end," one of the soldiers said in disbelief. "Without an attack, without heroes, without shots." The commander shook his head and answered with the bitter clarity of someone who had seen too many wars. "No," he said, "this is not the end of the war. This is the end of one of its lies, because today we proved that waiting can be a form of combat, and that not every silence is weakness." When night came, it was different, not empty and not threatening, but heavy with the memory of what had happened. And every soldier knew that tomorrow everything could begin again. But now they had something the war could not take away. They knew that once they had already endured without firing a shot, and that was enough to remember. The hardest battle is the one in which you do not shoot, but remain human, even when the entire war is waiting for you to break.